Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to CCG VIP Luncheon. Thank you for joining us at today's CCG VIP Luncheon. The CCG VIP Luncheon series is initiated and hosted by the Center for China and Globalization, CCG. This event aims to share China's largest developments with the embassies in China, international organizations, Chamber of Commerce, multinational companies, and academic experts. It is a high-end platform for international exchange, providing insights into China's development and exploring global cooperation opportunities. Today's luncheon will focus on the opportunities and the challenges of green trade. We will explore related issues and conduct the analysis together. We are honored to have the distinguished speakers who will share their insights and perspectives with us later. First, please allow me to introduce our keynote speaker for today. He is Pascal Lamy, coordinator of the Jacques Dooler think tank networks. As well, the well-known title is former Director General of WTO. Welcome you, Mr. Pascal Lamy. Before we start, let's take a moment to acknowledge some of our special guests and VIPs who are here. We have invited many distinguished ambassadors to China. They are His Excellency John Busuttil, Ambassador of Malta, His Excellency Carlis Inhamban, Ambassador of Latvia to China, His Excellency Asin Hanafi, Ambassador of Egypt to China, His Excellency Hassan Husseini, Ambassador of Jordan to China, His Excellency Paulo Nisumento, Ambassador of Portugal to China, Her Excellency Marta Roque, Ambassador of Spain to China. And we also invited many ministers of embassy to China, including ministers of embassy of Canada, Minister Consular and the Deputy Head of Mission, Embassy of Norway, Minister for Economic Affairs, Embassy of Israel, Minister of Embassy of Argentina, Minister of Embassy of Japan. Also, we have other senior diplomats from different embassies, including from Embassy of Sweden, Delegation of European Union to China, Embassy of Switzerland, Embassy of Turkey, Embassy of Germany, Embassy of Poland, and Embassy of New Zealand. Also, we have invited some distinguished guests from the chambers and the multinational companies, including from BDI, from China Association of International Trade, also from VDA China, and the European Union Chamber of Commerce, and the Adana Foundation, of course, our great delegation from Jacques Dooler's Institute. And we have invited some people from the multinational companies, including BMW, AHK, Great China, and Neo Euro. And we have invited the distinguished guests from international media in China, including the guests from Reuters, the Wall Street Journal, International Business Daily, China Daily. Of course, we have invited some distinguished guests from Beijing and China, from different departments and ministries, including from our MOVCON, the senior non-resident senior fellows of CCG, including like Mr. Huo Jianguo, Mr. Sun Yongfu, Mr. He Weiwen, Mr. Jing Xu, and the Dean of Institute for WTO Studies, University of International Business and Economics, Tu Xingquan. And of course, we invited the director at the MOVCON Department of WTO Affairs, Ms. Zhou Yunlei. On behalf of CCG, I extend a sincere welcome and heartfelt thanks to all the experts and guests today. Maybe there are more distinguished guests I haven't introduced, but later you can have more exchanges on the table. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Wang Huiyao, who is the founder and the president of Center for China and Globalization, also the former Counselor of State Council in China, to introduce our keynote speaker. Floor is yours, Dr. Wang.
Thank you, Dr. Miao, and Your Excellencies, our keynote, Pascal Lamy, also our distinguished guests from China, different association departments, and of course chambers, and of course our international guests from all the embassies, and of course from all the associations and industries and companies, and of course our media representative today. So it's really, this is the sixth CCG VIP Luncheon that we held this year. So it's really this is the largest actually we ever held in terms of at roundtable scale. So we can see the attractiveness of the subject today that we are really having. Actually, this morning we had a closed-door roundtable at CCG for over 2.5 hours, talking about the managing climate, technology, and also geopolitical transition in the European automotive value chain. So today's launch is really about this green transition. I think it's really a timely, a very relevant topic, a green transition and green trade transition that we've been discussing. And so we have as we also know, there's a really critical time as well. We're facing a new election imminently. Tomorrow we see the U.S. Election. No matter who is the president, I think we're going to have a new era that really in the business, economic, and geopolitical climate of the world. So it's really important. But how we can really, but this launch is really about China EU collaboration on the green transition, but also on the EV cars. As we know that China and Europe are now talking with this subject right now. There's a new tariff announced. China and EU are still in negotiation discussions. The door is still open. And of course, Jacques Deleuze, the Institute is a very famous think tank in Europe, and have networks in both Paris, Berlin, Brussels, and many, quite a few places. And of course, Pascal Lamy is a very old friend, and he has spoken at the CCG this year and spoke in the past. And but I think what we will do is that we will have a Pascal to give a keynote, and we have also invited quite a few Chinese experts to share their views on the subjects, and then we will open up for the discussion. Of course, we have the think tank representative from Jacques Deleuze, LV, and also Nicholas with us today as well. So this is really a very concise, impacted luncheon. And I know that this afternoon, many of us, including Pascal Lamy, we go to Shanghai Import Expo. Tomorrow afternoon at the Shanghai Import Expo Hongqiao Forum, we'll have another CCG forum there on also on the sustainable development for the green industry there. So tomorrow afternoon we have a section, and then on a day after tomorrow we have 8 European Policy Center CCG project. We have 8 European think tank, including Jacques Deleuze, coming to Hangzhou. We're going to have a discussion there at Hangzhou downtown, but also at the CCG, the Yangtze River Delta Research Center in Hangzhou. So we have really 2 or 3 days of this fully impact discussions, and we have a very good feedback and of course summary for respective departments as well. Now I think I'll start this formal presentation of Pascal Lamy Mr. Pasganami. I mean, he's the coordinator of Jacques Delors think tank networks, which has an office in Paris, Berlin, Brussels. And he also is the former Director General of WTO. He actually served 2 times, over 8 years at the helm of the WTO. And so he has holds various mandates at the global, European, and French level. He's also, he's the founding president of Paris Peace Forum. I know that, but now he's also the vice president of the Paris Peace Forum, and also of the European branch of the Brunswick Group, and coordinator of the Jacques Delors Institute. And Pasganami also, of course, served 2 terms, as I mentioned, from 2005 to 2013. And of course, before that, he's also worked as a European Commission for Trade, and he is the head of the European Commission for Trade for many years. And of course, even before that, he has also been working at French government level at a very senior post. So he has a very impressive resume. But of course, Pascal is really a great champion for the global trade, of course, and a great thinker, and also a leader in the think tank community, and for many creation, for example, like a Paris Peace Forum. So I think what Pascal would share with us, what have been the Jacques Delors' latest research, but of course his new thinking as to how China, EU, and to the global, that we can find a new pathway and find a way to work together towards a more sustainable future. So without further ado, let's welcome Pascal to give us the keynote.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first, of course, thank my good friend Henry and the Center for China and Globalization for hosting this lunch, and for asking me to share a few remarks on our topic today. I'm here with one of my 15 different hats, the one that has to do with the Institut Jacques Delors in Paris, Berlin, and Brussels. And I'm here today with a team of the Paris Institute, who is has been working for the last 6 months on a big study that was commissioned with the European Association of Car Producers, and we are doing this study together with Sciences Po and my good friend Arantxa Gonzalez, who many of you know, as a part of the hearings, the consultations, the input we need to table a view of what should be in the future the value chain structures of the European electric vehicle production. So it's a rather specific topic. As we all know, it's a relatively hot topic as far as EU and China relationship is concerned. The EU just decided to impose countervailing duties on exported electric vehicles from China to the EU. The EU did it according to WTO rules and due process. China believes that these duties are not right according to WTO rules and due process. This is now under litigation. That was not the point of our discussion today. The WTO adjudication system will now decide who's right and who's wrong, not the point of our discussion. The point of our discussion is looking forward. Is there, and if yes, how, a more cooperative approach between EU and China on the future structuration of electric vehicle production in Europe, with the present wave of technological change, the shift to electric mobility, which we have decided, while also taking account the next stages of that, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, which is automated driving. So all this is part of our picture. And in preparing these few remarks, I remembered my conversations with Premier Su Wongji roughly 25 years ago, when I was in charge as EU Trade Commissioner to negotiate with China the terms of entry of China for the European Union with the Chinese authorities. It was a long and protracted negotiation, as could be expected. And at the end of the day, I had, as often is the case in this sort of negotiation, to have a tête-à-tête with the Chinese Prime Minister in order to determine the final scope of who gives what and who takes what. And I remember Premier Su Wongji, from whom I must say I've always had a lot of respect, telling me, look, my political equation is very simple. China needs to catch up. In order to do that, I know that China can do 2/3 of the way. But I need foreigners to help us doing the last third of the way. I need to open China. I need foreign investment. I need foreign technology. I need foreign know-how. And this is why we have decided to join the WTO. So that's my case. I'm ready to pay a price for that, and I want you to understand what my equation is. So let's finish the negotiation now that I hope you understand exactly where I am. 25 years later, it's the other way around. We Europeans need to catch up. We Europeans know we have a number of assets, and the car industry in the European Union is a major and powerful one, and it has a formidable track record of innovation in the combustion area, not yet in the EV area. So the question is, how much we Europeans do we rely on ourselves to manage this transition, and how much of foreign technology and investment do we need? That's the fundamental question. There is a series of options. The Americans have chosen the decoupling option. We, EU, will not choose the decoupling option. Our preferred option, as we all know, is what we call de-risking, which implies a level of cooperation with foreign investment and trade. The question is, can we, should we, together structure this cooperation in a way that is win-win and not win-lose? So the issue is there a way for such a cooperation among the Chinese car industry and the EU car industry moving to electric mobility? We do not have an answer to this question, to be frank. We are looking at the various options, and hence this interaction which we had this morning, and which I think will help us framing a variety of options when we finally produce our report, which is to become extremely soon now. This cooperation, if we can frame it the right way on both sides, will have to respect WTO rules. There is something we have in common with China. We have a lot of things in common. We have differences, including serious ones on some geopolitical issues. But there's one thing we have in common, is that we want to proceed by the WTO system, which is, by the way, the reason why this duty dispute is administered by agreement on both sides by the WTO system. Which means that there has to be a principle of level playing field. This is a principle which, whatever solution or frame we find in future interaction in investment and trade on electric vehicles, will have to be observed by both sides. This is a point on which we have to, from the very beginning, agree that the investment and trade relationship has to be in a proper basis of reciprocity. In the car industry, China is not a developing country. This principle leads to, of course, giving some weight to investment and trade policy, but the EU cannot run an industrial strategy just by a trade and investment policy. What we need, and I think the present situation is a clear demonstration of that, what we need is an industrial long-term strategy, and within this industrial long-term strategy, we organize our respiration and interaction, investment or trade-wise, with the rest of the world, and in the case of EV, inevitably with China, given the leadership China has acquired in this area. So that's where we are. That's what we are trying to do. It still is a number of explorations, which is what think tanks are paid to do. We are paid to think these issues in as much as a holistic fashion. I will finish this very short presentation by mentioning an issue which again surfaced in the discussion this morning, and which surfaced very clearly in the first deep conversation I had last week in Brussels with a new Chinese ambassador in Brussels, Ambassador Tsai, which is this context which we in Europe have framed some time ago, which is that the EU-China relationship has to be seen within a triptych of partnership, rivalry, and competition. What I've heard, and I'm in China, I've been in China for already 3 days this week, I've heard a lot of, on the Chinese side, this triptych needs to be reviewed. There is too much rivalry and not enough partnership and competition. And I got this message once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, so it clearly is a message that is coordinated, as it should be, by the Chinese diplomacy vis-à-vis its European counterparts. I just want on this our Chinese friend and our non-European friends to understand that given what is happening in Ukraine, you need to factor in this context. If you think, and if we think about how to better articulate an EU-China relationship, including in a fairly technical issue like the automotive industry, this context has to be factored in. Please understand that for the Europeans, the invasion of Ukraine and what is happening next door on the European continent is a terrible issue. I won't say more. I'm not going to enter into diplomatic acrobacies, but I just want to leave you with this notion that in the present circumstances, getting a proper, active, positive cooperation with China bumps into this political reality. We have to take into account what European public opinion believes. So I'll leave it there. We have to work, and we will try to table options, if not recommendations, that paint, hopefully, a more cooperative pattern than what we've had recently on electric mobility. But there are also other issues which need to have in mind to precisely determine the corridor of cooperation which we have ahead of us, and which, as usual, I hope, will be a bit wider in the future than it is now. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Pascal, for your very encouraging and enlightening speech. Of course, we are at the crossroads, and then with of course with the major election in the U.S., with this EU new tariff suggested for the China EV cars, and then of course with the sustainable development, the demand of the world for the climate. So how we can really continue to collaborate and new approach, new JV approach. We were talking this morning, 40 years ago, we had many European companies, German companies come to China, have JVs in the Chinese market. Can we get Chinese JVs in the EU and also for the global market, really create a new narrative for the sustainable development. So I opened up for a few Chinese guests that I also invited for joining our lunch to speak. First, I would like to have Mr. Jin Xu. He's the president of China International Trade Organization under the MOFCOM. Was the minister at Chinese embassy in the UK for trade. So President Jin, maybe you could share a few thoughts on yours, and I will ask Mr. Ho and Mr. Sun to share theirs as well. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Wang Huiyao, Henry. And I think, we had a very good time this morning. We talked a lot about our history, about our, difficulties, and we also talked about our, future. And today, probably late today, we can know the result of the American, election result. America is too far, and Europe is much closer. And Paul Kalami is our, Chinese, very old friend. He came to China in 1966, right? That time he still remember China was the bicycle kingdom, because every morning, and nowadays, if you go to the street, you can see millions of cars running on the street. But 38 years ago, China, you can only see the bicycles. Now, China also made a great achievements with the help of other countries, with the help of our European friends. And we very thankful for your help. And today, let me, Pascal, let your delegation that came to China talk about our difficulties. Also, we are facing some, react. But I believe, in my age, we can we can recite a lot of Chairman Mao's, words, because Chairman Mao, told us, and when you are in difficulties, our comrades must see our achievements, must see the light, must enhance our courage. And so although we have some difficulties in our EV, but agreed with Mr. He said, that's a temporary, stage, and light will come, now will come soon. And let's join our hands, for our better future with everybody at present. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, let's see the light in the future. So absolutely, we still have a big hope to work together, without question. And I'd like to have Dr. Huo Jianguo. He is the Vice President of China WTO Association under the Ministry of Commerce, and also a non-resident senior fellow at the CCG. Perhaps Mr. Huo, you can share your view as well.
Hello, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad to attend this VIP luncheon. And just Pascal Lamy talked about the world trade situation. I think now this world is in disorder. Everything is in disorder. And maybe if Trump wins this election, the world will be even worse. I think the reason is we have the main principles to follow. It seems we lose some rule-based competitions. So especially in some country, always break the rule. So WTO become weak. So I noticed that WTO decided to push the reforms, but now there's seems still difficult. Here I have some idea. I think WTO reform should be divided into two parts. One is we should concentrate to the domestic, its self-function, because its function now is weak. So we have to strengthen the function and make some new mechanism to make it work. And second part, we can talk and discuss about the rules and regulations to changes, e-commerce or some subsidy. We have to discuss that, but that's in the second step. If we put all the rules changes and the WTO itself's mechanism to want to change or want to make the reform, it's very complicated, and we have no way out. It's always delayed. So, and at present, I think WTO's reform is still very important. We have to concentrate on the WTO reform, and especially feel key trading partners should gather together to discuss the issues. And if WTO reform can go forward, I think at least the world trade and investment will be benefited from. The world economy will be benefited. When the world economy is good, the rest things is easy to talk. But now is the world is difficulties. Everything is very hard. So no one can make friendly talk, and competition and even the Cold War concept and the bloc confrontation, it seems it's very serious. So I think we should get some consensus on the WTO reform, and let's together to push the WTO reform. Okay, thank you.
Okay. I know Mr. Ho, also the former president of China International Trade and Economic Research Academy of MOFCOM. So absolutely, WTO reform, we are talking to the right people, and I think China, EU, really have all the common interests to safeguard this multilateral platform, WTO. And now we're seeing a U.S. election, and now we don't know who is coming up, and of course we'll see some new changes probably. But let's really maintain the WTO, and which is very, very important for all of us. Next, I would have Mr. Sun Yongfu, Dr. Sun Yongfu. He's also a non-resident senior fellow at the CCG, but he's the former Director General of the European Affairs Department of MOFCOM. He knows so much about China-European cooperation. I'd like to hear from you as well.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to join this VIP luncheon. Actually, personally, I know Pascal Lamy for at least 20 years because I became the DG, Director General of European Department of MOFCOM, starting from early 2003. So at that time, he was the Trade Commissioner. So we had already some trade dispute concerning the solar panel, textile production, and we solved this by negotiating based on the rule of the WTO. Now we have the tension of the EV cars, and I hope that also in the manner of cooperation we can solve our problem, although the negotiation is still pending, ongoing, and I hope the result will be good for both sides. When China joined WTO 2003, the shares of the Chinese trade is only, I think, 4% of the global. And last year, the shares of the Chinese trading good is already more than 14%, 14.2 at least. So the world is changing, China is changing. I think the progress of China, which has been made during that 20 years, relies very much on the cooperation of our bilateral economic relations, especially from EU side. And you have transferred a lot of technology to China. We have a lot of joint ventures, and here in China by heavily investment from Germany, from France, Italy, UK, that make China within this 20 years change a lot. Now China has been #1 trading in goods for I think 15 years already. So from nothing, now is quite important, and #2 in GDP. So I hope we can keep our good relations on track by concentrating on cooperation, maybe sometimes competition. I think competition makes progress. China is making some progress in some technologies, especially the EVs. So we tend to cooperate with our partners in different, member states of the European Union. And I hope the same manner could be from the other side, because, you need two to tango, So I think the worry is sometimes we feel there's too much concentration on the rivalry, but less on the competition and the cooperation. I hope that will be changed. And if that attitude could be changed, the future of our bilateral relationship could be much better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sun. Absolutely, I think, this definition of the competitor and a rivalry and also competition. There's two to one basically. So at least we could make it more positive in terms of atmosphere. And but I think this morning we talked about this new changing dynamic about EV cars and also its impact and value chains and many things. I know every Fabry, she's actually, and also with Nicholas, is leading this study that we have talked a lot in the morning. And so, there's 3 areas as mentioned about of course, there's 3 triangles that have been talking to, basically regarding the decarbonization and competitiveness and economic security. So perhaps I could ask Evie and Nicholas to share a little bit before we opened up for our experts to continue discussion. Because that's all from Jack Delou's Institute with Pascal Lamy taking the lead on that. So we'd like to hear from you a bit more. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. We, in this study, find that the European Union's automotive industry is really caught within a strategic triangle between 3 different objectives. On the one side of this triangle, the European Union wants to decarbonize. It has set very ambitious targets, much more ambitious targets than China or the United States, to fully decarbonize its automotive sector by 2035. On the other side of the strategic triangle, we have the question of competitiveness. The automotive sector is an industry that requires economies of scale, global markets, to have competitiveness of its firms. And on the third side of this triangle, we have the question of economic security. So in a fracturing geopolitical environment, there are questions about the inputs that are required for EV production, which were not quite as pertinent for ICE production. And the question we are asking ourselves is, where are the trade-offs between these 3 different sides? Where can the European Union's automotive industry find a new way forward? I'll let my colleague Veer maybe talk a little bit about some of the specific issues of these sites, like competitiveness and economic security.
What the EU automotive industry is facing is not only progressive transformation, it's really a revolution, because it has to deal with the legacy of an important industry, which is representing 7% of jobs within the EU. It has not only to scale up its EV production capacity and technological innovation to be competitive in that sector, but at the same time also support the transition of this ICE industry, which is a very complex industry, a very intense supply chain involving a lot of suppliers throughout Europe. So of course we have a concentration of those supply chains in some member states, but overall it's really a European interest that is at stake. And currently on the competitiveness side of this strategic triangle, we're facing a slow demand, which is within the EU in EV sales, which could, while the demand is really strategic to create the economy of scales for the industry within the EU, still high prices, ranks anxiety from the consumers. Well, a lot of slowing factors that are not helping the European industry to scale up. And those are internal challenges, but at the same time we have those external challenges with the competitiveness that the Chinese sector has gained, with huge investments since 2009, a fierce competition, very important subsidy support, And what the EU is really focusing on, it's a level playing field. That takes to the third side of the strategic triangle. Economic security is about reducing the over-dependencies in all the sectors, more specifically in strategic sectors, and the EU is really focused on de-risking and focusing on dual-use technologies. But the weight of the automotive industry in the EU economy is so important, and it is so important for social stability, political stability, that it is really a central issue for the economic security strategy of the EU. And the concern that the EU has more specifically, it's in the important bottlenecks that we have in supply, very important over-dependency, not only to the production of batteries in China, because China is producing 75% of batteries currently. And it's not only a problem for Europe, it's a problem for the whole world to have that concentration of production. But in addition, because we have an important, a huge bottleneck in the critical mineral supply, not so much in the mining, but usually in the, much more importantly, in the refining stage of the supply chain. And this is really a challenge for to increase the capacity of the EU in the production of battery, beyond the late stage in which we still are to reach to the fourth generation of batteries. Just a last word. We're focusing a lot today on the EV sector and the implementation of the tariffs on the EU side is an important initiative. I mean, it has raised enough discussion within within the EU and on the bilaterals, in the bilateral relation. But we have to consider that it's really the beginning of the European strategy. And the way we're going to calibrate this strategy, European industrial strategy, and overall support to the EU automotive industry, is also saying something about the EU will also address similar issues that we have in other sectors, in other industrial sector. So if we're talking about a win-win cooperation and relation, as you was mentioned before, to tango we need to be two. We need also to have on the Chinese side very concrete proposal and engagement. And it was very interesting this morning to have those mentions about joint venture, about cooperation, even in third countries. We need to be very concrete and to build on that, and even thinking beyond the EV issue.
Great, thank you, Evie. And before I open up for the discussion, I would like to have another final sharing from Professor Tu Xinquan. He's the Dean of WTO Research Center at the University of International Economic and Trade. So perhaps, Mr. Tu, you can share of your suggestions.
Okay, thank you. I didn't expect this opportunity. Yeah, actually, as we have discussed this morning, I believe right now, as you mentioned, the positions of Chinese and the European automakers have changed compared with like in 1980s, 1990s. So as I suggested, probably we could maybe have a different direction of cooperation. So in the past, we have actually from European companies. Right now, the basis, actually important basis of Chinese automotive industry was helped by the European companies. But now, some Chinese companies are leading in the EV sector and the technology especially. So there will be another of movement. So I think, as also mentioned by other experts, right now, Chinese companies could work with European counterparts to share our technologies and expertise with European companies. And another suggestion, actually, I also have mentioned in another second track dialogue between US and China, that we probably, the Chinese and the European companies could work together in exploring and developing third markets. So China, US, and EU are not the whole world, right? There are a lot of other places, other opportunities. Right now, also, as I said, the US and China also have this problem in the EV sector. But we have developed an even larger market, then the direct competition will be diluted to some extent. So another thing is the decarbonization is a global necessity. And actually, just a few days ago, I gave a lecture to a group of African countries. They also said that they very much welcome Chinese EVs to be exported to them. They could skip over the ICE sector, ICE industry, to directly the EV industry, to the EV period. So this would also accelerate the decarbonization process in these developing countries. I think Europe and China have their own kind of comparative advantage in doing this, because you have also very historical and long-term relationship with like Africa, Latin America, Central Asia. But China also has its own advantage. So we could work together to develop those new markets. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I forgot. I don't know if Ms. Zhou Yunlei, you have maybe share a few words. I mean, Ms. Zhou is the director of a WTO Department of Ministry of Commerce. Maybe I'm glad you are here too. Okay.
Thank you very much. Very honored to be here to attend this VIP luncheon. Just in the morning, we have very fruitful, constructive discussions about how to solve the problem now facing by the Europe and China. I mean, this kind of discussion make me to recall my previous experience in the WTO. Actually, we have a lot of discussions about how to deal with the green policies implemented by the members. Just as Nicholas, they have a very, constructive report about the triangles of the different dimensions to reflect on the EU-China problems. We also have, the discussions in the WTO, that is how to measure the green policies, such as Chinese, maybe subsidy policies, in the direction of green transition in each countries, and also the European Union's Green Deal policy is very famous. And the members say that how to measure the impact, the trade impact, and also the environmental impact of such kind of policies. So we have a lot of discussions, seminars about the impact of the industrial policy. That's why now the DG says that WTO should, advance with time, and we should talk about the trade impact of the climate policies. So members have, to some extent, consensus that first, each kind of green policies, whichever forms, should be on the WTO rules and strictly abide by the WTO rules. This is the first one. And the second one is that we should try our best to minimize the negative spill effect, trade effect of the green policies. And so the one that the green transition, climate goal is the global issues or challenges facing by all the nations, that we should call on the WTO members' collective efforts. This is very important. So just for my perspective, green competition is a race to the top, but the protectionism and the tariff is a race to the very bottom. So we think that the cooperation between China and Europe is always the only way out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Zhou from WTO Department of MOFCOM. Where I think is really interesting, just to share a bit of my thinking is that I think we had a very productive joint discussion by CCG and Jack Delou think tank networks, and then I find that we were having some proposing, particularly from CCG expert that there's a third market. There's a big global market for China, EU automakers to work together. And so we can have a more positive narrative rather than just negative. So this is one proposal we reached this morning. And then the other thing we were talking is that we heard from German industry representative Elisa mentioned about actually this year we had a record, maybe another record of German investment in China. Half of that is in the auto industry. So you see the companies voting by their actions. They still have a big trust in the Chinese market. And China's EV market is the most competitive, most dynamic, and the largest application of EV technology and value chain and synergy in the world. So if you want to conquer the world, you have to conquer China market first. And that's why, all those European automakers knows that to harness the state-of-the-art technology, China is a must market to attend. So I think, in that sense, 40 years ago, we had a lot of German European companies come to China, JV with China. Now it's time Chinese company, JV, joint venture with European company, Germany, back to Europe, back to Africa, Latin America, Central Asia. So if we change the narrative, we really have a more positive attitude there. So I really think the company are not stupid. They know what's going on. If they are still invest heavily in the Chinese market, that means something. And so I hope that we have a very good report. I know Frank is from BMW, based in Brussels. I don't know if you want to share a bit as well. Anyone wants to talk and raise questions, please raise your card there and mention which organization you come from.
Yeah, thank you, Henry, to inviting me here, and I appreciate also the discussion we had this morning. We had mentioned it several times. We see a huge transformation in the car industry on the one hand, and on the other hand, we have a discussion about the competition, and mostly the discussion is now about the element of the fair competition versus the cooperation element. Historically, if we look to China, and I can talk for our company, it had been a huge period of cooperation. I remember times when I had been here, 2004, when the automotive industry and the market started. And I remember the figures, the total market was 800,000 cars a year, which is now our sales number in China. So you have seen a huge transformation, and the whole industry, and let's say the success, and Pascal mentioned it at the beginning, was cooperation and bringing also technology to China, bringing production to China, and by that helping also to ramp up the industry here. What's the issue right now is, and that's a big challenge, not only for the industry but also for the region, is how to manage this triangle we were talking about. We are all about reaching the 2050 Paris targets, so that's the overarching element we want to look at. It's about changing technologies to do that, but it's also how to manage that transition, and in a tension between technology element, bringing customer and the market to that transition, and of course, and that's I think a key element, it won't be a win-win situation for all. So in every transition and technology transition, you can take the technology one, you can take solar panels, whatever, you name it. You had always companies winning on that and other losing on that. And I think that's the key challenge, which currently is mainly the discussion in Europe, because it's that element of economic security. If we manage to, let's say, to make the transformation by getting growth, by onshoring production, by, let's say, enhancing prosperity while decarbonization of the industry at the same time, that would be a success story. The current one is more the fear of a threat that we have had in the last 5 years in the EU Green Deal discussion, mainly the focus on transition and less on the competitive side. And suddenly now, and I know that the COVID period had an additional element to do that, because we lost a little bit track on what was happening. You know, a lot of people came to China like after COVID, and suddenly appeared how the technology advancement had happened in those 3 years period of time. And now it's the element of how to ramp up, how to accept that there is a leadership difference on the technology side, where we should cope together. But we must also see that the whole topic of the industry and regulation, government incentives is much more complex on that. It's not region versus region. I'm telling you, we have that China tariff issue, and I try to repeat that. We have a cooperation bringing cars from China to Europe, and we have higher tariffs as being a European company than most of the Chinese one. And that shows that there's a much bigger complexity in the whole system, finding the right balance, finding a agreement on how you address global subsidies, how to cooperate while being competitors. And that's a new discussion we try to bridge and try to engage on such discussion. The key element to finish is really how to focus more on the cooperation options than on, let's say, the rivalry one and the threat one. So we need, let's say, a positive narrative, especially for Europe, probably believe more in us, and by that be more able to cooperate with China on that. Yeah.
Thank you, Frank, from BMW. Absolutely, let's view each other as opportunity rather than as a threat, and we can do that. Okay, raise your card if you want to question. I have Ambassador Hassem Hanif from Egyptian, you know, Egyptian ambassador. Your Excellency, your comment, and followed by Ambassador from Jordan. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wang, and I join my colleagues in expressing our appreciation for inviting us to this very august event, and of course I listened with great attention and gratitude to all the remarks mentioned before, and of course we are part of this world, the developing countries, and even whatever happens between China and the European Union is of impact to us as well. My point is, of course, I totally agree with the speakers before me that some decarbonization measures and some this, of course, recently the carbon border mechanism that has will be, of course, imposed on our exports to the European Union beginning, I think, 2026, if I'm not mistaken. Of course, I personally understand that there is a drive towards climate action and the green transition, and of course, many European countries, we share with them the need for a more green world and more environmentally friendly industries. But this transition in our case would take long and is very costly process. And it's very detrimental to our export at the moment. We export for our economy a substantial percentage of our exports to European Union, being the neighborhood. It's our neighborhood. And of course, I'm not speaking only for myself, for Egypt, but of course this has been raised time and again by many of our partners in the South, the Global South. And so I just wanted to hear Mr. Lami's advice on how we already are engaged in discussions with the European partners and the level of experts. But we, of course, would very much appreciate to hear his advice on the way forward on this very important issue. Thank you.
Great. Maybe collect a few before Pascal give an answer. And also, Ambassador Hussein from Jordan. Yes.
Thank you, and again, thank you, Henry and Mabel, for this another interesting debate and lunch, and especially with our respective guest speaker, Mr. Lami, whom always I've admired during his both mission in the E-Commission and the WTO. And that brings me actually to this, to my comment and then my question. Well, you know, we are used to coming to your luncheon, Henry and Mabel, relaxed from our diplomatic pressure and listening to the experts and to our guests away from the diplomatic, you know, constraints and so on. But I have to admit that today I've listened too much diplomacy than I've expected on these issues which we were all looking forward to hear some frank and strong opinions about what's happening really now and what the world is facing. I'm saying this because, well, my country, Jordan, has very special relations with the EU. We have an advanced status with the EU. We have an excellent relations, including preferential treatment for trade, investment, and so on. So is this case with China, where we have a strategic partnership also with China. When we look at our export to Europe, it's so limited simply because of so much of non-tariff regulations, including rules of origins and so on, which makes it really not only a dream, but sometimes even very difficult and impossible sometimes to penetrate to the European market. And when we look at the Chinese example, we see where all these regulations are met, and then suddenly comes a new regulations or a new situation where this competition or these highly competitive products coming from China are facing now in new walls, I would say, to intercept the interference. Now, I'm a little bit puzzled. So for before we enter the market, we have a lot of those regulations that looks like walls. And when we break all these walls, and new walls will be erected, this is how I see it from my point of view. I want to go directly to my question, because we are frustrated from already existing now war against international law in terms of peace and security in the world, especially my country, my region are facing now. We are facing something that is now everybody's talking about, the new narrative, the new concept of rules-based order, which is a way to evade and to depart from the international legitimacy and international law that has been agreed for so long in terms of United Nations and many other. Are we moving toward a new rules-based order, trade order, in the same sense that will be departing from what we already have been agreeing upon in the WTO and other trade international negotiations? Are we moving into that direction? Because if we are moving in that direction, what's the use of all of these institutions, including the WTO? This morning I saw an interview for the current Director General of the WTO. She was saying 75% of the world trade is according to WTO. It's based on WTO rules. Now, what worries me now is the 25%. Are they going to decrease or increase? And in that sense, what will be the future? Are we going to face again a new rules-based trade order that will depart from all our commitments and that we will have to face now shockingly against our interests, especially as developing countries? Thank you again.
Great, thank you, Your Excellency. So probably before Pascal answer, we have another comment question from CCG Senior Fellow Mr. He Huiyao. He was also Trade Counselor for Chinese Embassy in San Francisco and Consul General in New York.
Thank you. Now I would like to say another thing. As the Senior Vice Chairman of Global Alliance of SMEs, I'm glad to say that we will launch a major event later this month in Hangzhou, Global Industry Cooperation Conference, to which the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China will be a key player. And also the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai will also be a supporter. So they will be attended by Global 500 companies and by companies from Europe, from America, Japan, and from Asia, elsewhere. We will issue an initiative, join hands to support globalization and the multilateral trading system. So I hope that all of us, Europe and China and the countries your honorable ambassadors represent, will also join us to support globalization and the multilateral trading system, because we are meeting with headwinds in the global economy, and only this can we uphold the globalization and the multilateral trading system, can we meet the goal of 2030 sustainable development set by the United Nations. So let's work together. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So before other people think about questions, and also our media friends and diplomatic and industry, I'll give it Pascal here.
Let me make three short points answering to what has been said. First, I'd like to rebound a bit on what Frank Nederlanden from BMW said. Yes, we had 20 years ago, 30 years ago, in the car industry, a cooperative relationship between US and China. But let's remember this was under Chinese rules. When the EU car industry decided to go to the Chinese market with its vast promises, China said, okay, welcome, but with two conditions. Joint ventures in which we will keep a majority for 10, 15, 20 years. And second, technology transfers. So it was a cooperative model, but under rather precise conditions. The cooperative model was not just open. It was open under some conditions. And I think we need to have this in mind if we try to emulate what happened at the time with a new cooperative system where China has technological leadership. And I think this conversation shows that maybe a model of this kind could be on the table. I'm not saying it should be. We have not totally finished our study. But in a way, yes to a cooperation a new cooperation pattern in this industry, but there will have to be some rules of the game as there were 30 years ago when we, EU, started penetrating the Chinese market. On the question by the ambassador of Egypt, that's a very wide issue, which is how do you combine trade opening, basically the WTO system, and greening our economies. In a way, we are all committed to open trade, and we are all committed to decarbonize. How do we articulate these two elements? This is a very complex issue internationally for one reason which I have discovered, having switched part of my activities from trade and international economy to environment protection. WTO works with trade opening via multilaterally determined contributions. If you want to open trade in the WTO, you go around the table, you will do this, you will do this, you will do that, you will do that. At the end of the day, the sum of what we decide to do together will be multilaterally determined. We will all agree that you do this, including special and different treatment. On the environment side, it's totally different. We've decided to go there by nationally determined contributions. And this creates a tension in the system because nationally determined contributions translate into different objectives, different timing, different trajectories, different instruments, including instruments that have an impact on trade. If we price carbon at €100 a ton in the European Union, of course we have a problem trading with countries where the price is 0 or 5 or 10. This is inevitable. So we have organized our international system, which in a way that implies a coexistence between MDCs on the one side, NDCs on the other side, and with the necessity to resolve this inbuilt contradiction, which we have created. We haven't built a Paris Agreement in 2015 in saying we will multilaterally determine what is the contribution of each country to decarbonation. We have a carbon budget. And you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this, and at the end of the day, we agree that this is the way to go. So, sorry for this bit of an abstract approach, but I think trade wonks have a problem understanding the way environment decarbonation works, and environment decarbonation wonks have a problem understanding how trade works. So we have to build this bridge. Now, back to the thrust of your question. In the case of the EU, yes, we have decided to green more rapidly than others, and that's our own political decision, because this is what European public opinion decided we should do. This was not invented by whatever sort of God. It stems from the collective preference of the Europeans to move forward in greening the economy. We've chosen to do that mostly through carbon pricing, hence this issue which necessitates a border adjustment so that the EU production systems, which are imposed €100 a ton of carbon emitted, do not go elsewhere, which would have zero impact on the environment. That would be a carbon leak. They would emit carbon elsewhere at a lower price. So we have to have a system like this. I think in the case of the CBAM, I would be less affirmative about the famous deforestation directive. In the case of CBAM, there's been a lot of tests, a lot of consultations, a lot of sort of messaging, which is why it was basically decided 3 years ago, and it will only enter into force in 2026. And as you know, a number of details of how do you measure the carbon footprint for the few products that will enter into this carbon border adjustment at the beginning, which is steel, aluminium, electricity, fertilizers. This is done very progressively. But I recognize that this is not the whole story. The Institut Jacques Delors in Brussels, who is specialized on the Green Deal, and who, by the way, published the first CBAM template in spring 2020, that's a long time ago, and the EU Commission used a lot of this template for its final CBAM decision, together with the Member States and the European Parliament. We've also been very loud, very, very loud on the fact that until recently, the EU was focusing too much on the trade environment, whereas it should focus on the trade environment development dimension. And this concept is now known in Brussels as the triangle. And we've tried to convince, so far rather successfully, that instead of doing things in silos within the Commission, they should do it in a more holistic way, factoring in, including the development dimension, meaning, roughly, to redirect part of the EU development and technical assistance to programs that help developing countries matching the new green standards, which, by the way, are not just on industry, but are also more and more on agriculture, even if the EU is much slower than we would have wished in greening its own agri-food system. So my answer to your question is you're absolutely right. This dimension has to be factored in. That's probably one of the reasons why the deforestation directive, which is not a big problem for Egypt, but which will probably a larger problem for other more forested countries, will be delayed for some time in order to be technically cleaned and broomed, and I think it's a dire need to do that. So you're right. The question is now, how do we solve this issue within a triangle? And on the last question about the WTO rules-based system, as I said in my few remarks, the EU, and I'm not speaking for the EU, I'm independent, including here, but the EU will abide by WTO rules. This is clear. It's a decision in principle. I mean, our DNA is rules-based. The way we've constructed the European Union is rules-based, which is why, by the way, people like Frank Niederlander complain that we are too ruly. We are making too many rules. It's always about rules and rules. Yeah, we are rules-based. And sometimes maybe over rules-based. That's another question. So we will always abide by the WTO, as we did it, by the way, on these countervailing duties, which have been built and calculated according to the very precise dispositions of the ASCM, the Agreement on Subsidies and Countervailing Measures, which is one of the pillars of the WTO rulebook. Now, China disagrees with that. China believes we've wrongly calculated our numbers. Again, this will be adjudicated. The good news being that this will be adjudicated between EU and China according to WTO rules. Okay. Now, of course, we have an elephant in the room, which is the US, who basically have decided to go on strike. And my answer to your question, whether international trade will remain rules-based, for the moment is, I think it will remain rules-based for the EU and China, and that's the big shot. And I'm sure it's the same for Canada and Australia and the United Kingdom and Chile and Singapore and New Zealand. What I see is that the US are now dispensed from observing WTO rules. They have decided that the price of WTO conformity, according to their geoeconomic and geopolitical objectives, is too high. Now, can we, medium and long term, have a WTO rules-based system without the US? Maybe, but I would not speculate too much at this stage, especially on the eve of US elections, which we know might bring a bit of a different stance on this, although I'm among those who look at the details on trade issues, and I haven't seen much of a difference between Mr. Biden's trade policy and Mr. Trump's trade policy. This is a more general issue. The US have moved protectionist. That's a fact. They have their own reasons to do that. But which is why my answer to your question is nuanced. If it's about EU or China, I'm not speaking for China, but my guess is that they will, because they also know the value of a rules-based insurance policy. If China was not in the WTO, China's exports would be bashed in the world of today by whatever tariff, like, by the way, the US do it. So I think that shows the difference. But for the future, we have to think more seriously, if the US maintain this stance, how can we run an international trade system with one of the elephants of world trade outside of the zoo?
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Pascal. I see there's one plate up, maybe Professor Tu. And then maybe I'll give one chance to our journalist, Jonathan Chang, is the bureau chief of Wall Street Journal in Beijing. So you have the last question.
Okay, thank you. As earlier actually mentioned that the transition from the older fuel cars to the EVs is like a revolution. It is really revolutionary. Because right now actually EVs are like a combination of cars and smartphones. So the success of Chinese EV makers is at least partly due to the well-developed ICT industries in China. So actually I think China and the EU should also have more cooperation in the ICT industry. But like right now, you know that Huawei has become a very important enabler to some Chinese EV makers. It is already is a very important player. But right now, as you know, the EU has some restrictions on ICT industry, especially Huawei, and also like ASML's the chips maker, chips machines exports to China. So do you think that is it possible for the two sides to have more cooperations or to deal with restrictions?
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. That's a question. But we have maybe last question for journalist representative, Jonas Chun, the bureau chief of Wall Street Journal.
Thank you. This was a very thought-provoking lunch, so thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. I'm still thinking through everything that has been said here, but one question that comes to mind, and maybe it's a little more provocative, but it seems to me like if we're not already there, that we may be moving in the direction that China becomes the loudest or the most prominent advocate for the current system. I mean, if the US election goes a certain direction, especially, if that's the case, I mean, first of all, do you think that that is the case, that China may become the most prominent advocate on the global stage of the current system? And, you know, to what degree is it, and this, I guess, is the provocative part, is it because China has kind of won under the current system? I mean, they joined just a couple of decades ago, but they've managed to gain the most from it, and now the US doesn't want in anymore because they're not winning from it, and perhaps Europe is going the same way. Is that how you see things? Yeah.
Okay, on your question. For the moment, we are focused on EVs as a hardware tech jump. We're not yet focused on EVs as a software tech jump. That will come later. And it raises a different set of issues, which have to do with data collection, data availability, data privacy, data storage. As we all know, the US have not only decided to put a tariff on 100% on Chinese EVs, but they are banning Chinese software on EVs for the US, for reasons that have to do with their sensitivity on data. Now, whether China, for instance, would accept Western softwares on cars circulating in China and pumping data everywhere remains to be seen. We all have our sort of national security interests. So this problem will come. And I worked a lot on the global governance of digital ecosystems, including now artificial intelligence, including preparing this French summit that will take place on AI in February. My own conviction at this stage is that there will be no convergence in the digital world, the sort of which we had in the previous world. We had convergence in the way we would produce shoes, shirts, cars. Cars are produced in the IC the same way everywhere. So we have huge economies of scale, and we have similar technologies, which the diffusion of which is the digital system is different. We will have much less convergence, and we will have to organize more of coexistence. And the issue is how you organize coexistence. Because our collective preferences, as far as data are concerned, are extremely different. US is not dealing with this like EU. EU is not dealing with this with China, and India will probably deal with that in its own way. And by the way, I've heard very interesting development this morning about EV development in China, EU, and US. Factoring in India at some stage in the equation, I think, is necessary. It's coming big way in this direction. So let's work as openly as possible on the hardware part of the equation, knowing that the software part will have to be properly prepared in order to take into account the inevitable differences in the way we deal with data. On the question of whether China will remain the only supporter of open rule-based system, I would put it the other way around. The other way around is, will US be the only one to exit the system? Because as far as I know, I'm talking to a lot of African countries and Latin American countries and Asian countries, they like a rules-based trading system. Now, of course, they don't take a very prominent position in the WTO, given the US influence on many of them. But the question is not whether a vast majority of developing countries still need a rules-based system. A rules-based system for developing countries is, in a way, protecting them. Because of their weaker capacity to compete, they have rights or schedules or time implementations which others do not have. So I think the issue is really, will the US remain out of the system while imposing protectionist policies, either in the name of national security, with a sort of small yard, high fence, which is, I've always found an extremely clever trick of how to present the thing, because you get the whole, you keep the whole margin of maneuver of how high is the fence and how large is the yard. Really, the guy who invented that is very clever. And I would love to have done that at some stage, found such a clever way of keeping all my options open while providing with a nice picture. Or whether it will be Trump-like, which is starting from a totally absurd economic belief, which is that the US trade deficit is a problem for the US, and shows that the US lost and the others won. Excuse me, but this is absolute crap. The reason why the US have such a large deficit is that they undersave, they overspend, the other way around than China, by the way, but they have the dollar. So as long as you can finance a trade deficit is not a problem, and they can finance the trade deficit because they just have to print dollars. So the notion that the US trade deficit is a weakness for the US is nuts. And this leads me to the final part of the question: did China win? Of course China won, but we all won. Because the notion that trade opening is one win, one lose does not mean, does not reflect the reality. If you look at how, until recently, I'm not saying it's the case now, but if you look at the way the Chinese trade surplus moved from the moment it joined the WTO to, let's say, 2010 or 15, it shrunk. It has regrown since, but it shrunk. And if it shrunk, it means that China imported more than it exported. So I think the example of China, and I'm not saying China did everything right, nor, by the way, do I believe that the WTO rules is enough of a rules-based system. If you take the rules of WTO on subsidies, for instance, they are incredibly weak as compared to the use of this instrument 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and now that they have become a major element of all industrial policies. So the WTO system is way from properly ruling everything that has to be ruled to ensure a level playing field, taking into account the position of developing countries, And I've said and written and acknowledged that even in my case, I did a mistake, as we did, we collectively, let's say US, Japan, and myself at the time, we did a mistake when the question was whether before China would join the WTO, we should narrow the stitches of the net of disciplines on subsidies in WTO. This question was raised at the time. We, with the US and Japan, looked at this issue, and our lawyers told us, that's dangerous. If you start narrowing the disciplines on subsidies, some of our subsidies, US, EU, Japan, will be caught. So better keep the net with large stitches. We wrongly listened to them. We did not narrow the stitches of the net before China joined, and because we were blind to the future of China. None of us at the time would have ever imagined that China would have the huge capacity to subsidize it has now, which is why, in many cases, in some cases, China cheated with the rules of the WTO, and it was taken to dispute, and it lost, and it abided by the adjudication. In many cases, China is cleverly using the breadth of the nets in the WTO. So again, I don't think it's just that China won. China won, we all won. The way we distributed the pain part of the Schumpeterian equation of opening trade is a different story. And in my view, it's no coincidence that the US, who have a relatively modest welfare system as compared to their GNP per head, did not properly cushion the impact on a number of their industrial sectors of the Schumpeterian impact of trade opening. But I know this is the view of an old social democrat monkey.
Okay, great. I think we are running out of time, and I think we had a very good, fruitful, and stimulative lunch, and very great food for thought. I agree with Pascal. You know, it's all win-win. You know, China win and the world win, and that's, of course, China. You know, become the largest trading nation, and now, of course, contribute almost 30% of global GDP growth. And they also start a big program for Global South. You know, there's a lot of benefit that China contribute. I agree that we have to really sustain this global multi-system, particularly China and the EU. And of course, we hope US would do the same. And I think let's sustain this Bretton Woods system, particularly WTO. Let's enhance it, improve it, and enlarge it. So on that note, I hope that we will end here, and we appreciate our keynote speaker, Pascal, and also our Chinese speakers, and our speakers from Jack DeLuise, and also all the participants at this table. So let's give Pascal Lamy and all of us a big applause. Thank you. So we'll take a group photo here, and then to memory of round tables and visit of Pascal. Thank you.